Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name is Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this Friday afternoon. We've made it to another fancy Friday, as many of you are pointing out in the chat here on Behance. If you are tuning in live, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. We've got Aubrey from Boston. She has a half day off. That's exciting. Wish I had a half day off. Although we do get many days off. I can't complain. Laura and Cody and Bernadette. Bernadette was happy that she was able to catch a live stream. Some of our streams, including the Daily Creative Challenge streams, are on replay every 2 weeks. But these masterclasses are live. Speaking of days off, we actually have next Friday off as one of those, relax and rewind or please rewind. I don't know. This isn't Blockbuster, but we have next Friday off just to kind of spend time with our family. Adobe's a great company to work for. So keep that in mind. Tatiana and Brett from Hamilton, Ontario, Anita, Umacorn, Mesayu, great to see everyone. If you are tuning in on Twitter and you do want to chat along, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so I can see all of your amazing faces. Bernadette from Israel, hope you're all staying safe over there. I know things are a little bit tough right now. Hope you're safe, hope all of your family is safe, and I just hope, I don't understand half of what's going on over there. I should probably educate myself, but I just hope that things come to a calm resolution at some point. I know it's not fun to watch unfold. All right, yeah, Cody's pointing out no masterclass next Friday. Miriana from Budapest, great to see you. Orlando, Blockbuster. All right, so we are going to hop over to my screen and get going for masterclass number 53. 53. We've been at this for 53 weeks, and many of you have been here since week number 1, so thank you. I appreciate that. All right, so if you caught last week's masterclass, what we started the process of doing is building out and prototyping this experience. It's a fitness application really focused on 3D transforms. And I got the idea, because I'm certainly not going to take credit for this, from Slava. So you can check him out on Dribbble. I will actually post a link in the chat on Behance right now. And he created this design. I believe he used After Effects. So there's a little bit more flexibility in terms of 3D and, animation control and things like that. But I figured it'd be kind of fun to try to recreate something similar using Adobe XD, and this is the one that I came up with, and we started the process last week. So go back, watch that episode, and then follow along with this one. So here's where we left off last week. We started the process of building out these cards, and as you can see here, if I activate 3D transforms from the right, we have some transformation. So we've not only pushed it back in this fake 3D space, right? But we've also rotated it a little bit. And you're left with something that looks like this. And of course I can grab this lovely little gizmo. Let me zoom in here so you can all see what's going on. I can grab that gizmo and rotate it. Look at that. I can also rotate it, oops, I deleted it, on the other axis as well to really give it some perspective. And we're gonna go more into this as this masterclass progresses. We also built this navigation bar at the bottom, and we made sure to use components so that if we do have multiple navigation bars, as we do, we can dive in here, we can make some changes, and you're going to notice that they also push the changes to our other navigation bars, which is wonderful. All right. So we wrapped up last week by working on this screen. Basically, what's going to happen is when someone taps on the CrossFit card, it's going to expand into this screen here. And just to show you what everything looks like, if I go ahead and press play, I can not only drag the cards, right? But we also set up a tap trigger. Look at that. I should also add sound effects. By the way, speaking of sound effects, I did post, hold on, I'm going to go on a tangent for a little bit. I did post this on Twitter and Dribbble a few days ago. It's a Winamp skin around Adobe XD. Clever, right? I'm also working on one for Photoshop just because I don't know why I do these things, but I do. But a few of you asked if you're able to add sound effects to prototypes like this, and the answer is absolutely. So I actually uploaded on YouTube/Howard Pinsky. I just uploaded a video this morning that shows exactly how that's done. So go ahead and check that out after the masterclass. It's a lot of fun adding sound effects and music and things like that to your prototypes. All right, back to this, right? So after this, click, It expands, and then additional cards come into play. And Bernadette saying, never watched an XD Masterclass. Welcome, Bernadette. I appreciate you hanging out. I don't know if you're an XD user. If you're not, download it. Have some fun. It's free to download. You can do a lot with XD, not just mobile app design, not just web design, but presentations. I keep going on tangents today. It's definitely a Friday, isn't it? So we released, not me, I didn't do anything, but one of the teams at Adobe just released the presentation plugin. I'm going to be diving very deep into this on future Masterclass and also YouTube video. But if you are looking to create presentations in XD, this is a very in-depth plugin. So check that out, download it, it's available right now. I'm going to dedicate a whole Masterclass to that plugin, it's that good. All right, so back to this. I do want to showcase how we created these cards, because at the end of last Masterclass, I rushed through it because we were running out of time. So I want to showcase one more time, delete, how these cards are created. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the good old rectangle tool and draw one out on this artboard, just like that. And for this card, let's go ahead and round out the corners a little bit. Let me just push this inwards. We can also drag out some guides if we wanted to. Oh, we do have some guides. Look at that. Just got to activate them. Right? I'm going to make sure it snaps. There we go. I'm going to round out the corners just a little bit, just like that. Beautiful. And then on the inside of this card, we want a few different things. The first thing we're going to want is a background image to really bring this card to life. So I'm going to hop over to Finder. Laura says, checked out the presentation plugin yesterday. It's really awesome. It is. It's the same team who created the whiteboard plugin and the quick mockup plugin. Both amazing plugins. So check those out as well. But that presentation plugin I think is going to be amazing. And they told me some of the features that are coming. I don't know if I can announce them just yet. I don't know if anyone from the team is in the chat, but good stuff. All right. So I'm going to grab one of these images, drag it directly in. And if anyone's new to XD, just pop an image directly into a shape. You don't have to create a frame. You don't have to create anything. Just make a shape. Could be a rectangle, a polygon, a custom shape using the pen tool. Pop it right in there. It's a good time. All right. Next thing we might want is some text. So I'm going to go ahead and just type out something like Monday motivation, because we all need some motivation on Monday, right? And let's see, what typeface do we want to use? There's like something like Mostra, which is kind of fun, right? And they have different weights. And most of the typefaces, if not all, that I use on these masterclasses are all downloaded and synced from Adobe Fonts. So if you have access to Adobe Fonts, which many of you do, you can definitely grab these typefaces, right? So we could do something like that, right? There's also New Cabal, which I've been using recently, or Cabell or something like that. It's a German typeface, I think. And it's a nice one. It's not as condensed as the previous one, but it could work. Now, what you're going to notice, and maybe I might want to flip this actually. Possibly. No, that's fine. I think it's okay like this. Or maybe, yeah, I don't know. I'm indecisive. So what you're going to notice is as we're starting to add and customize some of this text, and you're going to definitely see this going forward, is that it's a little bit difficult to read, right? Hey, Lori, great to see you. So what we can do in this case, there's a few things we can do. One, we can change the background to make it a little bit more simple, right? But if you're really set on this background, which I'm going to make some changes, I'm going to push this out a little bit. So we have a little bit more white space, which is blue in this case. We could start using an overlay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this existing image, Command and Control D, and then the simple overlay is to set it to black and then drop the opacity, right? It works in most cases. If you want to get a little bit fancier, you can also add a linear gradient, set both stops to black, but the one at the top you're going to set down to 0% opacity. That way you have this nice overlay at the bottom, and then you can move your text down here and you have some nice contrast, right? Or if you really want to get fancy, you can add colored overlays. So in this case, instead of these black stops, what I might want to do is maybe at the top left, we might want to go for a nice pinkish purple, right? And then the bottom, we might want to go for more of a purplish color and then drop the opacity here, right? And then what we can do is put the pink stop at the top left, purple down at the top bottom right, and then experiment with some blend modes. So, looking at this, it's okay, right? But if you switch to something like hard light, all of a sudden you're getting some blending action going on. And then from here, you can continue to experiment with not only the colors, but the opacity, how many stops you have. So we can add some purple in here or blue, right? Experiment with these sorts of things. Then you can drop the opacity overall. And it adds a little bit of contrast in there. It almost adds like a light flare, which is interesting. But it also adds some color, which is nice. Again, it depends on the situation. It's not always going to work. Sometimes you might just have to go for that simple black overlay. But it's looking okay. All right, so we've got this text looking okay. Not great, but it'll work. And then we might want some additional information. So maybe down here, we might want who the instructor is. So I'll drag out a little circle. And in here, of course, you can hop over to Finder and you can grab an image and pop that directly in. You can scale it up if you want to. Or you can use an asset from your libraries. So if you have been joining me over the last few weeks, you know that I love my toy faces. And Cody will put a link in the chat to the artist who creates those toy faces. So I can drag any of those in as well. And they come in as linked assets because they're in a Creative Cloud library. So if I did make changes to this particular asset back in Photoshop where I edited it to replace the background, then that will just come right on in, which is great, right? Or what you can do, you can also use a plugin. We were talking about plugins earlier with the presentation plugin, but there are plugins like UI Faces, where you can choose from various sources, or you can do something completely random, right? And let's go ahead and apply randomly. And it's going to look through all those different sources, considering I did not check any of them, and it's going to find a face and pop it directly in there. There we go. Fancy, right? All right, let's go ahead and go back to this one. And for the text, I'm going to type out, I'm just going to grab a name, let's say Laura. There we go. And I'm going to, I was going to make it a lot smaller, but yeah, maybe a little bit. But I kind of like that, that large and thick typeface. There we go. Now, one more thing you might be noticing, and this won't happen all the time, but sometimes, is this particular image here, the background is very similar to the image in the back, right? So we have this bluish color, then we have this almost turquoise greenish color. They clash a little bit. It probably won't make much of a difference in terms of the user experience because this particular avatar, you can still see the person's face. But if you do want to make sure that it is a little bit separated from the background, you can add something like a border, right? If you want to get stylistic, you can just keep it at a thick white border. You can drop the opacity a little bit, so there's a little bit of a bevel, right? You can put on the inside, the outside. You can also add a little bit of a shadow if you want as well. And I talk a lot about shadows because I'm very particular about my shadows, but keep it subtle. And you can also add in a little bit of color. We're dealing with blues and purples in the background. So if we add in a little bit of blue and purple to the shadow, very subtle again, right? So there's with the shadow, without the shadow, right? It separates it from the background, even without that border in place. Something to keep in mind, right? I don't know if I love that shadow in this particular case, so I'm going to remove it. All right, now, indeed, Cody, hashtag keep it subtle. Turquoise teal is my favorite color. I love that color too. I think it's sea green or something. I've been looking for iPhone cases and watch bands and stuff like that. Very particular color. Actually, while we're on tangents and stuff, let's find that color. Let's see. It's somewhere in this range. It's not super saturated. It's like right in there, right? So it's not all the way over to the right. It's like right about here. It's just a nice calming color, right? I'm very particular about my colors. There we go. All right, now at the top, we might want to put some very quick information about when this is happening, or if it's a live session, is it happening live, right? So again, rectangle tool, we're going to draw one out. Now for this one, I might want to round out the corners at the top left and bottom left, but I may not want these ones up here rounded as well. So I can simply hold down Alt or Option and drag that back, and you can also do that directly inside of the Properties Inspector over to the right. And for here, what we're going to do, we're simply going to grab the text tool again, type out the word live. Whoops, I added that in there. We'll change this to a nice reddish pink. take a peek. That's not bad. I was thinking maybe, again, like the name at the bottom, drop the weight a little bit. Maybe a touch, yeah. I don't want to go too small, because if you do something like thin, whoops, that's italic. If you do something like thin, because we're on such a small display, it's going to be very difficult to see. So keep that in mind as well as you're designing. If you're designing a very large landing page, thin typefaces could potentially work because they're a lot bigger. But if you're designing for mobile, especially small elements, be careful with things like that. All right, so we have that in place, and then we might want some additional information over to the right. So I'm actually going to duplicate this, hold down Alt-Option, drag over. Now this one, we actually want the opposite. We want the rounded corners on the right and not the left. So I can just hop into my Properties Inspector and view, flip it around, and then stretch this out if we wanted to, right? Or if we want the background to resize as we're changing our text, let's go ahead and type out starting now, tap to join. And we're going to set this at, let's go for bold as well. And maybe we'll go a darker color for the moment. We might change that, right? And then what we want to do is, it's looking a little large, I think. Actually, it's not bad, I don't know. So what we want to do now is grab the text layer right here and also grab the background. And we're going to pop these into a group. So Command and Control G, and I'll call this, let's say CTA. And from within the Properties Inspector, you want to make sure to turn on padding. And if you're new to XD or you haven't used padding yet, essentially what's happening is when you turn padding on, XD is going to look at the background layer, which is the layer or the group or the mask or the Boolean object at the very back of the layer stack. And again, it doesn't have to be just a single layer. It could be a group of layers. A little bit more advanced, but you can do that. And then it's going to look at all the layers on top. And it's going to look at the padding around all those layers and set it directly for you, which is great. And of course, you can, if you needed to, you can always adjust that padding manually. But the really nice thing about this is, let me go ahead and, so we have some, let's see, we have 9. 9's a weird number. Let's fix that. So we have, let's go for 8, might be too squishy, but we'll try. 8 and 8 on the right. And now if we dive in and we need to change this, starting soon, right? You're going to notice that background automatically resizes. But I'm kind of happy with what this copy is now. Now, of course, we have this white box on a white box over here. So we might want to give this one over to the right a little bit of style. And we can experiment with background blurs. It's a little bit too much. Default background blurs you're probably never going to use. What you'll want to do, especially when you have a lot of elements behind it and you have text in front of it, is really crank that blur up so that everything behind is nice and diffused almost, right? If you take a look at what it looks like a lot lower, the text is a little bit more difficult to read. So bump that blur up, then experiment. Maybe we can darken this a little bit, and then maybe change the text to white. Interesting, right? We can also add something, not on that. We can also add maybe a border to this shape. Let's go white and drop it a little bit. Okay. And then possibly, if we don't want that border on the left, we can just take this live section and just bump it on over. There we go. That's looking interesting, right? And all of a sudden that legibility is much stronger. All right, so we have our first card looking fairly good. I'm going to make sure to move some of this information. Maybe I'll move all of this over it. Whoops. Move all of this over a touch. And then going back to what we were talking about earlier about, what do you press to get that view window? Oh, that's a very good question, Bernadette. So at the top right-hand corner, there is a play button that will launch your preview. It's going to show you what is on the artboard that you currently have selected. Or if you have nothing selected and you've defined a home artboard, then it's going to start with that. But you can also use the Command Enter shortcut or Control Enter. Yeah, Control Enter on Windows, Command Enter on, or maybe it's Return, I don't know. I always get those mixed up, but that'll launch the preview as well. And then what's nice is if you have a multi-artboard preview and you're on, let's say Artboard 4, you can repeat that command to go back to the beginning, which is great. All right, now going back to what we were talking about earlier about padding on this object here, we can also use padding on this entire group of objects, right? So we have all of them selected. I'm going to pop them into a group. You can also do the same thing with a component, and I'll call this card. And now I can turn padding on within the Properties Inspector one more time. Now, what you're going to notice, this is very important, it set the padding at 0. And you're probably like, what happened? It goes against everything you just told me about padding, looking at the background and all the layers in the foreground. Yes and no. So take a look at this. So inside of this group, right, we have these two images at the back. We have our background layer, which is the layer at the very back, like I mentioned earlier. But then above that, directly above that, we have the overlay that we created, and it's the exact same size. So technically, XD is doing exactly what it should be doing. It's looking at all the layers above the background layer and determining the padding. And because this overlay goes right to the edge of that background layer, it determined the padding was 0. So what you have to do in that situation, if you have a background that contains multiple objects, simply grab those objects, pop them into a group, Command and Control G. I'll call this background. Doesn't have to be called background. It just helps my sanity a little bit. And now if I turn padding on one more time, you're going to notice it's treating those background layers as one, and then all the layers above it, it's recognizing that there's padding around it. So if I didn't need to maybe, add an extra line here, or grab the avatar at the bottom and move it down, you're noticing the background is adjusting really nicely. And then you can go ahead and turn on something like a stack, right? Which is going to look at all the layers inside of this card and figure out which direction they're aligned, top to bottom. And now if I dive in and add some additional lines, the background's automatically going to resize as well. Now I can grab these and move them around. So stacks and padding, if you're not using those, definitely use them. However, in a situation like this, I might like stacking, but I may not want padding, right? Because I want all of these cards to remain the exact same size. So good to know that it's there, but in this case, we may not need it. All right, let's do one more card. Let me move this up a little bit. And maybe this one, let's change what is an antioxidant. I don't know where I got that from. I think it was one of the examples that I looked up. There was a class about antioxidants or something. I don't know. If anyone in the chat has a better idea for some sort of a fitness lesson that might be happening later today or tomorrow or whatever to replace this, let me know. All right, let's go ahead and grab another image. This one looks pretty good. Pop that directly in. And then I need another name. Let's go for Bernadette. Bernadette. There we go. Perfect. We've still got that border. Actually, the background looks almost identical. And then for here, we might actually want a completely new background image. Let's see, we have a bunch of images here. Let's see, this one's always fun, but the verticalness may not work in this situation. This one's not bad, it's simple, right? Do we have any others? This one's fun. It doesn't really talk about antioxidants. Proper form for a push-up. Oh, and I think I have, look at this. There we go. This might be a tricky image because there's the focal point is centered and there's not a lot of room for text, but we'll try it, Cody. Do the stacks and padding work when you have a hover or click? Oh, so it does not. So stacks and padding is specifically a design feature at the moment. However, what you can do is use stacks and padding to help you create the states that will expand. So you'll want to put all the objects into a single component, create some states, use stacks and padding to help define what they look like, and then you'll be able to use, see that in action when you're prototyping. But it doesn't automatically work in prototyping. It's a very large challenge that the team has to get around to. They do want to get around to it. I just don't know when. All right, so we're going to change this to what Cody was saying. Proper form for push-up. There we go. And then for the image, what you're going to notice, if I grab this image here and drag it in, because we have that overlay layer on top, it dragged it into that layer. So we don't want that, obviously. So there's two things we can do. We can either hide that layer and then drag that image in, right? Or if we either don't want to hide it or don't know where it is or whatever it might be, you can simply select that layer, copy the image from Finder. I think this works in Windows as well. And then you don't want to paste it, but you want to right click and then paste appearance. It'll take that image and pop it directly into that shape. And you know what? With that overlay, I was going to say we're probably going to have to change the overlay. It kind of works. I think it might work. All right, so we have that. And maybe this one in specific is not live at the moment. So maybe there are upcoming classes. So let's go ahead and maybe we can get rid of live. Maybe this one we can move over a touch. Let's change this to 4. And this might be, let's say, 8:30 a.m. And again, you're seeing that stacking or the padding in action as we're making that change. And I can duplicate that over. Now, at this point, you might want to start thinking about components, right? What I was about to do is grab this particular tag, or maybe it's a tag, or maybe it's a time, whatever you want to call it, right? And I was going to duplicate this over, and then probably duplicate another one, so we have 3 different times that this class is going to be taking place. But in the future, if I didn't like the styling of this, I can't simply go into any of them and make a change, right? I would have to go into all of them and make that change. So in this case, now that I know that I'm going to be using several of these in my project, not just on this card, but other cards as well, I might want to turn this into a component. So within the Properties Inspector, I'm going to hit that plus button. Boop, there we go. And you can also create various states, regular states, hover states, the new toggle state. But for this, because we're dealing with mobile, probably not going to use hover states. So we can just leave it as is. We can also create additional states if we want to. We might revisit that in the future. So we have this one tag, but we want more. So what I'm going to do is we're also going to take advantage of stacks in this situation. So I'm going to group this particular tag. What did I do? I'm on something. It's frozen. All right, give me 1 second. I hit something, and there's something in the foreground that is not happy with me right now. All right, hold on 1 second. I'm going to restart XD. Alrighty. And open that up. It's always fun when you're designing live. You never know what's going to happen. I think I pressed something that activated something else, and then it froze. But we're all good now. Alrighty. Pop this up on this side. Okay. So going back to what we were talking about stacks. So let's go ahead and zoom on in here. And the good thing about cloud documents is all that was saving in the cloud as whatever happened. All right. So we've got our single tag here, and I'm going to go ahead and pop this into a group, Command and Control G, and I'm going to call this tags. And now, even though there's just one object inside of this group, I can turn a stack on. And it's going to define this as horizontal. And now what I'm able to do is just dive in and duplicate. And duplicate. And now I have various tags. So this one I can dive in and change to, let's say, 9:30. Maybe each one is an hour. Maybe there's a break, and this will be 11:30. Now, you're noticing what I just did, right? Or maybe you're not, but you're noticing what happened. As I changed this one to 11:30, this one changed as well. You're probably thinking, why did that happen? And that's because this one is the main component. So if you're editing the main component, it's going to push those changes to all other components, all other instances of that component that were not overridden, or at least that property was not overridden. So I'm just going to bring this back to the beginning. And this one's 8:30, and now I can edit the instance. And by the way, if you're new to XD, the main component is the one with the solid green diamond, and then the ones with the hollow diamond are instances. This one has a dot in the middle because I overrode certain properties. If I did not, like this one, it would be just a hollow diamond with no dot. All right, so we have 3 tags on our card, and looking at it, it doesn't look too bad. People will probably be able to see it, but the styling might be changed a little bit. Specifically, especially since we have this darker background behind it. So we can dive into our main component, and if you don't know where your main component is, right-click, edit main component, it'll take you right to it. And now we can make some changes, right? So we can maybe brighten this up a touch, or we can drop it even more. That doesn't look too bad. We can also add some color, right? So if you wanted maybe, let's say these these tags to be a little bit red or blue or whatever color you want, you're probably noticing that nothing's happening as I'm making these changes. And that's because our effect opacity right down here at the bottom is at 0. So as we start bringing that up, it's going to bring back some of that color from our background blur. I don't know if I love it. I think I might keep, I think I might keep this at these dark tags and see what that looks like, but it could work. All right, and Bernard is saying the main component has a darker tone. It does seem like that, doesn't it? And that is because even though the background blur, all the properties are exactly the same on this particular element, because the background blur is enabled and it's interacting with the layers behind it, you're gonna notice if I move this over, it's actually in real time adjusting based on what's back there, which is kind of neat, right? All right. So that's looking pretty good. So we have our 2 cards now in place. And on this artboard, let me actually go ahead and group these. And these will be called secondary cards. And on this artboard, we're going to make sure that they are somewhere in this area here. But what we're going to notice is if I go to this artboard here, let me actually delete the ones from last time. And I click on CrossFit. Those cards just kind of appeared, which maybe you want that, right? But maybe you also want some animation to take place. And if that's the case, you'll want to make sure that these cards, these ones here, are also on the previous artboard that it will be transitioning from. So I'm going to copy these and make sure they're placed inside of the same group. I'm going to move them down. And we can also get a little bit creative with 3D transforms. So maybe I'll just rotate them a touch. Move them down a touch more, responsive resize, and now, whew, those cards kind of fly up, right? Let's do that one more time. There we go, pretty neat. All right. Now, in addition to these particular cards, we might also want, considering someone might go into this particular category, the CrossFit category, to see upcoming classes or calendars and things like that, we might want to show various dates. So let's go ahead and actually move these down a touch. And we're going to create a very mini calendar right up here at the top so that users can click on the various dates and they'll be able to see which classes are available. So let's start with the days. So this will be M for Monday. And let's get our styling looking pretty good. Let's bold that. I might want to bump this up a touch. And like I mentioned in almost every single masterclass, if you are working like I do half the time, very zoomed in, it looks pretty good right now because we're basically focusing just on that M. And it looks fine, right? But just go ahead and pop that preview open just to see how things really look. It looks okay, right? But many times you're gonna pop the preview open and it just won't. It'll look too small or too big or whatever it might be. But I think this could work. All right, so we have our M. And this is another good opportunity to use a stack. I think there's also a calendar plugin in XD. You can search for that, but I'm gonna do it manually. So I'm gonna go ahead and you can also use a repeat grid if you want to. I don't think I used a repeat grid on the one I created previously. But let's go ahead and group this. Days, we're gonna turn a stack on. We're gonna dive in here and duplicate and duplicate. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 7 days in the week, and we're gonna go ahead and this will be Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe Thursday. Now, I'm curious, when you all are designing calendars like this with abbreviated days, for Thursday, do you put just T or do you put TR or do you put TH or what do you do? I'm always confused. I mean, most people probably know that that is Thursday because it's before Friday and, you know, but I'm curious. All right, so we have our days of the week, but obviously it's looking a little bit squishy. So what we can do now is either directly from the properties inspector or by holding down your shift key, you can just swivel those out. I don't know if swivel's the right word for this, but we're gonna run with it. And now we have our days, right? And we do the exact same thing for the individual days. So let me actually go ahead and, so what I'm noticing is that I might want these particular days to be centered. So if I do this right now, you're gonna notice 12 is kind of hanging off because it's not centered. So what I can do is I can go through and individually center every single one, or what I can do is hop into my document assets, add this as a character style, and then I can edit it and make sure that it is, or maybe I can't. Can I not do that? Okay, I can just select. For some reason, I thought you can change the alignment directly there, but maybe not. I'll have to look at that again. All right, so that's looking pretty good. Make sure this is centered in our document. Perfect. All right, so hey, Megan, great to see you. So TH. Okay, we have a bunch of THs. All right, let's do that. TH. Perfect. Okay, now for these, we're going to go through and maybe this is this. Actually, what day is it today? Today is the 14th and it is a Friday. That doesn't help very much. Well, maybe it does. 14, 15, 16, and this will be 13, 12, 11, and 10, right? And because we have stacking enabled, it automatically pushed them away. So we're just going to simply dive in and bring them back. There we go. Now we might have to make individual changes because they are not perfectly aligned, but now they are. All right. So now we might also want to highlight which is the active day. So maybe today is Wednesday, right? So we're going to dive in here and select everything except Wednesday and maybe just drop the opacity to, let's say, 50%. And we're going to do the same thing for this one, everything but 12. Actually, we can do probably Friday, right? Because today is Friday. Let's drop it to 50%. Go back in here. And then, what is it, Friday? Yep, 50. There we go. All right, and then maybe just to really indicate that this is Friday, we might want to put a very simple square behind this. Let's go ahead and choose a nice reddish pink. Round out the corners a little bit, or a lot. Completely up to you. There we go. Perfect. It's looking okay. I might want to make this a little bit larger, and then maybe move these up a touch just to give a little bit more breathing room. That could work. And then the final thing we might want to add, right below, oops, dive in here, there we go. Right below these dates, we might want to have some very simple indicators letting users know that maybe there are classes on the day or there are not classes on the day, right? So right below, we can just add in these little dots. You can use an ellipse, you can use the pen, you can use whatever you might want. And let's just go for a nice same red color. That one looks pretty good. And we'll drag one over here. Maybe in this day, there might be, there might be 2 classes. And then maybe one over here. And I'll call this dots. Very original, right? All right, so we have our calendar looking pretty good. I'm going to make sure to group these elements and call this, I forgot to grab that one. Calendar, there we go. All right, so now like we explored a little bit earlier, if you did want this particular calendar to animate as the artboards are transitioning, then you would also have to put this calendar on this artboard here. But let's see what it looks like if it just fades. That could work, right? Maybe. We can also experiment, right? So we can grab this calendar, copy it, paste it on this artboard. Now, because we're dealing with Z depth, what we'll want to do is just grab the handle in the middle, push it on back until it disappears. Then we can maybe move it on up a little bit, right? So now, phew, it kind of comes forward and it slides down a touch, right? Possibly. You can also do it the opposite way, right? So you might want to move it down a bit, push it on back. Ah, I think that one, that's probably the winner. It just looks a little bit more natural as it's coming on up, right? Very good. All right, so that's looking pretty fancy. And the next thing we might want is maybe when someone slides up maybe these cards, we might want some additional cards to come into play. So we might want this to either collapse or move on up and a few other interactions to happen. Is there a class on the 14th? How would you add if there's a class on the 14th? So currently the user is on the 14th. So all the classes will be down at the bottom. So, that's a good question, Chris, but it's a user experience question that, the team has to think about or even test, right? would users expect to see the dots? Because when they're not on the 14th, they will see the dots. So it'll look something like this, for example, right? But when they are on the 14th, those dots will not be there. It'll look something like this. There we go. User experience question. I don't know. It's a good question though. All right, so what we're gonna do now is we're going to duplicate this artboard over to the right, and we're gonna start working on the next state. So in this case, like I mentioned, I might want this card to either fly away or fade out, or there's a lot of different ways we can do it. But let's go ahead and maybe move this on up. Maybe we can actually just do something like this, just to move it out of the way. The calendar we can move up. These cards we can move up. And then since there might be additional cards, maybe this is to browse all the classes, maybe there'll be additional ones that kind of show up down here at the bottom and you can scroll through. So if I go dive in here and I duplicate this card, let's add some additional information. Let's see, so we need a new instructor and we need, let's go for this guy. Whoops, I cannot see it, no, there we go. All right, pop him in there. All right, I need another name. I did see Chris in there, Chris Olsen. And let's see, I need something to do with basketball. I don't know much about basketball. Shooting, great. Was it free throws? There we go. All of a sudden, Chris, you are a basketball expert. I don't know if you play or not, but you do now. All right, so this one maybe this is also a live session. So I'm actually gonna dive in here. And this is another opportunity to use components and states. You can create several different cards and have different variations using, having one with the live stuff at the top, one with the tags. But for now, I'll just copy and paste. There we go. And we also need a background image. I don't think I have any more with basketball. I do not. So let's go ahead. I mean, there's a ball there. It's not the right kind. I don't know. I was going to grab this image because it's hilarious. Paste that, and let's go ahead and flip it. Look at that. Look at that guy. Although, I was gonna laugh, but this guy is probably in a lot better shape than I am. Perfect. Okay. And if you want to, you can also change the overlay. Maybe add some different colors. Ooh, look at that green. That's fancy. Maybe we don't need that one. We'll see. We'll see how that works. All right. Move that down. And then maybe there'll be one more down here at the bottom, just kind of peeking on in. And we're not going to change all this information. We'll just change the background. And let's go ahead and grab this one. Perfect. Sort of. It'll work. All right, so now we do have these two additional cards, right? And we have to make sure that they are present on the previous artboard. And this is one of the benefits of thinking things through ahead of time, so you're not going back and forth. But it's easy enough. So this might be basketball, and then I'll name this one, maybe this is a running one. And I'll make sure to grab both of these cards, hop in here, and then pop them down there. And now what we can do is we can start setting up maybe what a drag interaction could look like for this. Now, if a user is on this screen, right, they may not know right away that they're able to swipe up to see the different cards at the bottom. They might assume, right, because there's some of the cards are kind of peeking down that navigation bar, but they may not know. So there's a few things you can do in that case. One, probably the simplest thing you can do, is add a very thin line. A lot of users these days know exactly what this is, but some don't, which is why you need multiple ways of doing this. And pop this in the center. And this will let some users know that they are able to drag this up. And I would make sure to, maybe brighten this up a touch so that user can really see it. And then maybe add a little bit more breathing room, maybe move these cards down a touch. And then move the line back up, right? So it just lets users know they can drag on something. Of course, you can have some additional call to actions. You can make it very clear that there's a lot of ways to do it. But what we can do now is I'm going to make sure that this is also inside of this particular group. And now we can set up that drag interaction. So if I hop into prototype mode, I can select this entire group of secondary cards. You don't have to select that particular line. And I'm going to drag the blue handle to the right onto this next artboard. And then from the properties inspector, we want to make sure that drag is the trigger. And then it's going to automatically default to auto animate, which is great. So now we can just drag this up, right? And we see these additional cards. Now, there's a few additional things you can do to make it a little bit fancier, or depending on what you need to do, you can wire it back. Now, just to kind of show you how things can overlap with 3D transforms, what we can do in this case, maybe we want these cards to be collapsed so that the other cards can come into play. That may not make sense from a user experience point of view, but we're going to do it anyway. So we're going to dive in here. We're going to move this card up, and I might grab this card in the back. And with 3D transforms activated, Command and Control T, I can just move it back a touch. Just so I have a little bit of depth and a little bit more room for these new cards to come in. So now if I do this one more time, you're going to notice we have that 3D card look going on, which adds a really nice feel to it. Again, it may not make sense. So think these things through. And definitely test with users, but it definitely makes for a nice experience. You can do the same thing for this one, maybe push this back a touch. And then this one might overlay as well. There we go. And finally, perfect. Okay. Let me actually move this one down so we can see. I'm noticing I just cut off this guy's face. I'll probably fix that at some point. View. That's better. Look at that. That's a good looking card. All right. So one more time. Look at that. It's just a nice little effect, right? And if you want to see it all in action, what we can do is we can also add a tap trigger. So I'll go ahead and drag another wire over. Let's go ahead and add a tap trigger, auto animate. Let's do ease in and out, and we'll try, let's say 0.8 seconds. Probably don't want to go much more than that. That might be a bit slow. 0.6, and I'm noticing that on the second artboard, I did actually move this guy over, which adds an interesting effect, right? But if you want to make sure that it's consistent, just copy that image from this artboard, hop over here, and then paste the appearance. Make sure you have the right image selected. There we go. But it does make a fun appearance, fun interaction, right? You can also experiment with the masks. So if I wanted, let's say, I can make this one a little bit larger, right? So as I'm dragging this in, that mask is actually changing. Very subtly, but it's changing. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And then one thing we might also want to do is have a way to see a bigger calendar. And possibly that this right here is what triggers that bigger calendar. So you can do the same process of expanding this downwards. So let's go ahead and do that over here. Let's actually duplicate this artboard. I'll move that for a second. And then what we can do is we can grab these elements here, pop them into a group, and this will be called weeks. Turn a stack on, and then, not that one, my bad. This will be called week, and then pop that into a group, weeks, and then turn a stack on. That's a bit better. All right, so now we can duplicate, duplicate, and duplicate. How many weeks are there? 4 weeks? 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks pretty good. And I can stretch these out a little bit, just a tiny bit. And then I can continue going through and making changes. We're not going to waste too much time making changes to all these dates down here, but we can very easily do things like this, right? Maybe move this dot over, just to give a little bit of variance to this design. There we go. All right, Howard's blouse color is similar to the top background color. It is, isn't it? I did not plan that. Or maybe I did. I don't know. Probably not. All right, so we can go ahead and bring back, let's see the secondary cards, make sure these are moved down. Again, none of this makes any sense, right? So think these things through before you start going into high fidelity work. But you could use this handle, or you can just grab the whole calendar. Let's do a drag trigger, and we can drag this down. Now, you're noticing nothing's happening, right? And that's because those elements do not exist. Did the audio just disappear? I hope not. It looks like it's still going through on my end. So yeah, let us know. All right, no, working for me. Okay, good. Try refresh. Tell Umacorn to try to refresh the browser, and that usually fixes those problems. So we have to make sure that these particular elements are also present. So considering we only want the first line present on the first artboard, what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize a mask. So I'm going to drag out a shape across this calendar, select both these objects, and then object mask with shape, right? Now this is going to be called calendar, and we're going to use this one on this artboard here. And then here, all we have to do is grab the mask and drag it on down, just like that. And now we should be able to dive in here. And you have to select an object that moves, right? So you have to be careful when you're doing drag triggers and things like that, because there's nothing that technically moves for this particular screen. So what we can do is grab this one. We'll do let's see, we'll do this little guy here. There we go, much better. So keep that in mind. You have to grab objects that physically move across both artboards for drag to recognize that is a thing. So you can just drag that down. You see you have access to the additional days. Something wrong with okay. So Umacorn's headphones were malfunctioning, but we're all good now. All right, now the final thing I do want to showcase is, in my example, I'm going to do this very quickly. So in my example, there were these intermediate steps that added a little bit more motion to this particular. So here, right? There was another step that added a little bit more motion. And what you can do in that case, I don't recommend it for everything because it's a little bit overboard, is you'll have one additional artboard. So I'm going to drag this one in here, right? And then what we want to do, okay, would the calendar work as a component? It absolutely would, yeah. And like I mentioned, I believe there's a plugin for calendars that you can definitely check out. So what I want to happen is, this is the first set of cards. Actually, I want to duplicate the second set. And I want a little bit, almost like an over interaction. So what I want to do for this tiny little step here is dive in here and take these cards and really rotate them, really exaggerate that rotation, right? Something like that. You can even get a little bit creative and maybe move the navigation bar as well. So it's almost going to feel like there's weight to this particular interaction, right? And then, instead of going from this artboard to this one over here, we're actually going to go to this one. We can drag both of these over. And then from this one, we're going to go immediately to this one. So in the Properties Inspector, you want to choose Time, 0-second delay, very important. And then we'll try Ease Out. Now, what you're going to notice is because we have on this one, we have Ease In and Out, we'll want to change this to Ease In so that it eases in, gets to the second one, immediately goes to the third one, and then it eases out. And if we did this properly, let's see what this looks like. Right? So there's that little tiny step in the middle that kind of slams down the cards. Did you notice that? Cards have a little bit of weight to it, and then it kind of settles into place. And you can go as crazy as you want with this. I don't recommend getting too crazy, but maybe these ones will go up a little bit. I don't know. Does that make sense? Probably not. Boing. Fun. Useful? Probably not. Anyways, that is probably going to wrap it up for today's masterclass. Big thank you to everyone who has tuned in today, both on Twitter and on Behance. Next week, we will be off to recharge, but we will be back the following week with another masterclass. We're going to move on to something else. I do have a lot of ideas, but if you do have suggestions, definitely send me a tweet, twitter.com/Pinsky. Big thank you again, and stick around. Kyle T. Webster's coming up in just a few minutes, and I'll see you all next time.